Hola, hola, buenos días. Sean todos bienvenidas y bienvenidos a nuestro lanzamiento de webinar del Hub. Estoy muy feliz, todo el equipo está muy feliz. Soy Jessica Farías, hago parte del equipo de articulación de redes y estamos muy felices de estarmos en nuestro lanzamiento de ese mapeo. Me gustaría decir a ustedes, junto con mi colega Daniel, que también está acá, va a estar junto conmigo, que tenemos traducción. Abajo ustedes pueden activar, por favor, su traducción, la lenguaje que sea más a voluntad de a ti y que también estamos en YouTube. Entonces, estén tranquilos también a sacar cámara, cambiar tu nombre, como sea mejor a ti. Daniel, por favor, puede hacer también la explicação. Em português, a mesma questão. Embaixo temos a tradução. Vocês podem ativar para português, inglês ou espanhol, como seja melhor. E estaremos no YouTube, também com transmissão ao vivo e gravando. Então, fiquem à vontade em tirar a câmera ou mudar o nome. Daniel vai me ajudar com a
Inglés.
explicação em inglês.
Hi, everyone. So just to let you know, we have interpretation available. So if you click in the three dots or in a button that is called More in your Zoom screen, you can see a button that is called Interpretation, and you can choose whether you want to have the interpretation in English, Portuguese, or Spanish. Also, is good for you to know that this event is being transmitted in YouTube too. So if you don't want to appear in YouTube, you can turn your camera off. And if you don't want your name to be in YouTube, you can rename yourself in the application. Go ahead, Jessica.
Gracias, Daniel. Este webinar, su objetivo principal es que podemos socializar un poco los resultados generales que tuvimos de ese mapeo y también activar un diálogo estratégico con nuestro panel principal de abertura de este evento para comprendemos las tendencias actuales en políticas informadas por evidencia y en el papel de las redes colaborativas en contextos diversos, ¿sí? En nuestra agenda estamos hoy muy felices con nuestro ciclo de diálogo con personas muy queridas a nosotros del Hub en su global y el mundo. Entonces, muchas gracias de ese momento. Y después vamos a estar con nuestro equipo de Hub haciendo el lanzamiento del mapeo. Y al final un diálogo con todos ustedes, entonces invitamos que puedan también enviar preguntas en chat de YouTube o acá en el Zoom. Entonces yo paso la palabra al director del Javilac, Daniel, para que pueda presentarse y hablar un poco de nuestra red. Sí, Daniel.
Bueno, muy buenos días para todos, o tardes o noches, dependiendo del lugar donde se ubiquen. Mi nombre es Daniel Patiño. Soy uno de los codirectores del HOBLAC. También soy profesor de la Universidad de Antioquia y director de la Unidad de Evidencia y Deliberación para la Toma de Decisiones. Quiero empezar contándoles un poco sobre cómo fue concebido el HOBLAC. El Hub fue concebido entre el 2021 y el 2022. En ese momento vimos la necesidad de crear una red entre actores y organizaciones en Latinoamérica que pudieran colaborar y que tuvieran un interés en la institucionalización del uso de la evidencia para informar políticas públicas. Las personas y las fotos que ustedes ven a la derecha son las personas que han hecho posible que el HOBLAC crezca de la manera que ha crecido, y quisiera pues darle un agradecimiento muy especial a todas las personas que participaron en este mapeo y que han participado continuamente del HOBLAC, como Carol, como David, como Duber, como Ingrid, como Jessica, como Silvi, como Raquel, y obviamente como Laura, Shelly y Verónica, que les voy a contar un poco más adelante quién son. El Hub el Hub LAC, en el 2019, Laura Boeira por el Instituto de Veredas, Lucy Kuhn del Ministerio de Salud y yo coincidimos, nos conocimos en un proyecto que se llamó el proyecto Peers Project. Ese proyecto lo que buscaba era buscar mecanismos para informar políticas con la mejor evidencia científica disponible, pero durante ese proyecto lo importante es que conocimos a colegas, pues nos conocimos nosotros y conocimos a colegas de la Red Africana de Evidencia, del Centro para Política y de Conocimiento a la Política del Líbano y del Epicenter del Reino Unido, también con colegas de la Universidad de McMaster. Recuerdo que en ese momento estaban todos ellos. Y inspirados por esas experiencias, por la red, especialmente por la red africana de evidencia, creamos este HOPLAC como una red multidisciplinaria y multisectorial que inicialmente recibió apoyo de IDRC, de la Fundación Hewlett y del proyecto PEARLS. Nuestro propósito es, como ven en la imagen, conectar, conocer y capacitar. Y desde que empezamos con el HOPLAC, priorizamos la formación de un equipo diverso, el desarrollo de glosarios, informes de país, talleres, capacitaciones y herramientas de gobernanza que las pueden consultar en la red del HOPLAC y la construcción de una agenda colectiva de trabajo y de una identidad institucional. Este interés en crear redes y en el trabajo colaborativo llevaron a que varios miembros del HOPLAC hayan participado y estén participando de ESIC, que ESIC significa de Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative, que es un esfuerzo global de los principales actores que están interesados en el uso de la evidencia científica para informar políticas públicas. Esta iniciativa y los participantes se reunieron durante todo el 2025 para finalizar en un evento en noviembre que se llamó el Cape Town Consensus. En ese evento se creó la hoja de ruta, el roadmap, que va a guiar, que va a transformar la infraestructura de la síntesis de evidencias y del uso de la síntesis de evidencia en el mundo. Parte de esa transformación ya empezó con unas convocatorias muy importantes por parte de Wellcome Trust que les invito a consultar y que en la página del HOPLAC pues las tenemos referenciadas. Por último, con el fin de identificar y promover oportunidades de colaboración, el Hub reconoce la importancia de mapear sistemáticamente las organizaciones, los individuos y las iniciativas que conforman el ecosistema de evidencias en nuestra región. Es así como este trabajo que les van a presentar hoy tiene como objetivo identificar quiénes son estos actores, dónde se ubican, en qué trabajan, cuáles son los temas en los que trabajan, los tipos de actividades que realizan, sus necesidades y cómo se conectan con otras iniciativas. Entonces este es un gran trabajo que nos va a permitir realmente colaborar y unir esfuerzos para mejorar el ecosistema del uso de la evidencia en nuestra región. Muchas gracias por estar aquí, muy bienvenidos, espero que disfruten mucho este evento. Si quieren acceder al reporte, pueden escanear el código que tienen ahí a disposición. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos. Gracias, Jessica.
Gracias a ti, Daniel. Entonces acá estoy mostrando en primera mano a todos ustedes cómo está muy lindo nuestro informe. Ustedes todos van a recibir, ya están en nuestro sitio web. Y yo ya paso la palabra a mi colega del Javilac, Chelly, para continuar este momento. Chelly.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to colleagues from across the region and beyond. I am Shelley-Ann Hunt, and I am a member of the Latin American and Caribbean Evidence Hub. I'm very proud to be here today. Thank you to both Jessica and Daniel for setting the stage for an important conversation. I'm going to try to go pretty slowly, ensure that the translation is smooth. I just want to say it's my pleasure to moderate this dialogue on global trends in evidence-informed policymaking with focus on collaborative networks. For us at the Hub, this discussion is extremely timely as we move from mapping to action and as we continue to build a dynamic and diverse community that connects the producers of knowledge, the intermediaries, and the users of knowledge to ensure that evidence is used to inform decision-making on a daily basis in our region. I'm really excited to introduce our distinguished panelists. Colleagues, we are fortunate to also call our friends. I'll start with Professor Lavis. Professor John Lavis is a recognized leader in advancing evidence-informed decision-making across health and social systems. He's the founder and director of the Health Forum, one of the 2 WHO collaborating centers for evidence-informed policy. He also co-leads global initiatives such as the Global Commission on Evidence to Address Societal Challenges, the COVID-19 Evidence Network to Decision, and the Rapid Improvement Support Exchange. He holds a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Evidence Support Systems, and he's also professor in the Department of Health Evidence and Impact at McMaster University, as well as professor at the Africa Center for Evidence at the University of Johannesburg. Our second panelist is Dr. Carla Suarez, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Cochrane, one of the world's trusted producers of scientific evidence. Appointed in 2025, she's guiding Cochrane into its next phase, emphasizing equity, collaboration, and collective impact. From 2019 to 2025, she served as Cochrane's editor-in-chief, implementing transformative changes in evidence synthesis and providing timely insights to policymakers and governments worldwide. Additionally, she co-led the building of the evidence synthesis infrastructure collaborative that Daniel just spoke about, a roadmap for stronger and more equitable global evidence ecosystems. Thirdly, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Rona Miju. And Rona, I practice the pronunciation of your last name. Rona is a public policy and science advisory specialist with extensive experience at the intersection of research, policy, and global health system. She currently serves as the chair of the African Evidence Network, a community of evidence to policy generators for Africa. Additionally, she's the executive director of the Center for Rapid Evidence Synthesis, a senior lecturer in public policy at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and also the head of policy unit at the Malawi Liverpool Wellcome Research Program. Rona's work focuses on strengthening evidence-informed decision-making, translating science into policy and practice, and building institutional structures and systems that can enhance benefit. Again, I'm delighted to have such a diverse group of experts that will bring together their global, regional, and applied perspective. So I'll now invite each panelist to just give about 6 minutes, share with a brief on the following questions. We want to dive into what are the global trends shaping evidence-informed policy-making or decision-making today, as well as what is the role of collaborative networks like the Hub? What role do evidence ecosystems? We'll begin with John, who is unable to be with us here in person, but has shared a pre-recorded message. So I'll ask my colleague now to play John's message. Can I confirm that you guys are hearing me?
Hello, everybody. I'm so sorry that I can't be presenting in real time today. As many of you know who support decision-making, windows of opportunity sometimes open, and a window of opportunity opened here in Canada with a very important conversation about the future of our health system on the exact day of your meeting. So I apologize that I have to be in that other meeting. I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments in support of this exciting event that you have going on. One is just, I guess, reflecting on some of the big trends in evidence-informed policy. And to me, the big one, which Latin America and the Caribbean has been at the forefront of, is this movement to timely, demand-driven responses to questions when windows of opportunity open. Those questions could come from government policymakers, or they they could come from citizen serving or citizen-led non-governmental organizations. And when we do respond in these timely, demand-driven ways, I think, and again here, Latin America and the Caribbean is at the vanguard of this work, we need to synthesize what we've learned from elsewhere, other countries, other regions, ask what of that is relevant to our local context, mix those insights from other jurisdictions with the many forms of evidence from our own country, and then deliver them up in a way that is understandable to decision makers at the moment when they're making decisions. And there are other times where we need to be able to answer big questions, like what are the best buys in a particular domain. And I hope that, we're getting more and more able to do this in near real time. As opportunities come up, we can mix and match these forms of evidence and bring them to bear. ESSIC, I hope, the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative, is going to have a big impact on this work because it will make it much easier to pull in evidence from around the world and to think about what are the insights that apply to our local context. And again here, Latin America and the Caribbean have been at the forefront of this work on the Evidence Synthesis Infrastructure Collaborative. Leaders from the region, Shelley Ann Hunt, Laura Boera, Daniel Patino Lugo, so many people have been involved before ESSIC even began, through the Global Evidence Commission, through the planning process for ESSIC, through the Cape Town meeting that culminated in the ESSIC roadmap, and now through ongoing activities like the Open Data System Planning Group. And I think one of the unique aspects of ESSIC is this commitment to collective impact, this notion that each of us can do our part, but if we do it in a way that leverages all the other assets in a given country, in a given region, and globally, we can get so much farther faster. So, and again, here, leaders in Latin America and the Caribbean have really been pushing for this collective impact approach, and I'm really grateful to the leadership that they've shown. Some of the key final comments, I guess, that I would make is I really hope that Latin American and Caribbean leaders keep up these highly visible contributions, increasingly take on leadership roles, including in the regional hub for Latin America and the Caribbean that I hope will be announced within a few months, through the sectoral hubs that will be piloting these policy scale AI-enabled living evidence syntheses. I hope leaders in your region will be contributors to and users of the open data system. And I hope you're front and center in the year 2 foundational investments that ESSIC makes, like what I hope will be the methods transformation that will move us to policy scale AI-enabled living evidence syntheses. So just in closing, congratulations on your excellent report. This is exactly the type of leadership that we're so grateful to your region for doing, being able to see everything that's happening, who the actors are, what the facilitators and barriers of their work are, what the implications are for next steps, and then how the region positions itself to contribute to these global developments and to make the best use of them is really inspiring. So thank you all. I wish I could be there in more real time hearing others' comments, but thank you for letting me participate in this pre-recorded format. Enjoy the rest of the session. Thank you.
So we really want to say thank you to John for taking the time to pre-record this message and for his valuable contribution. We really also want to say thanks for his acknowledgement of our visibility and our contribution, especially in global initiatives. His emphasis on the timely, demand-driven, and where possible with the use of AI, real-time responses to questions facing decision makers is quite compelling. His focus on collective impact also speaks strongly to one of our principles that guide the work of our hub. So I'm going to turn over to Carla now, if you can share your perspectives with us on what are the global trends and how do collaborative networks such as the LSE Hub has a role in terms of ensuring everyday life is informed by decisions focused on the evidence. Carla?
Sorry, I thought that you said Rhoda. Bom dia, gente. Adorei a música do começo. Agora eu vou para todos os eventos, eu quero uma música igual que vocês colocaram. But unfortunately, I'm going to continue this conversation in English so that we can have a discussion of the panel. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be part of this dialogue, and particularly important at a time when we're all trying to move from mapping to action. So well done from you to start this. From Cochrane's perspective, we are a global network that is present across 100 countries. So I thought I would like to offer some reflections so that we can support the discussion. First, how global evidence network functions across regions. We have learned a lot that the global evidence network that we created, one of the biggest challenge is not to be a centralized system, but to work in a distributed ecosystem. The strength comes from connecting local knowledge, regional priorities, and global standards. So evidence should not be produced in one place and used elsewhere. It needs to be co-produced across different regions and increasingly shaped by the closest to decision and the communities that are affected by the decision. For us, this has required a tremendous shift from being a producer of reviews to become part of a broader evidence ecosystem. And this is very much thanks to the support of many of you and the challenge that you suggested to all of us. Second, I think it's an important point about governance and collaboration mechanisms. So traditional governance models are often too rigid for today's needs. In my view, what works better is shared ownership across different regions, but also with clear and flexible roles for producers, intermediaries, and users, and mechanisms that enable continuous exchange rather than one-off outputs. We are seeing a move toward network governance rather than institutional control, stronger partnerships, and more recently, collaboration with initiatives like ESIC to align infrastructure, methods, and open data. Everyone has to play a part and everyone has what to gain if we succeed. But this is not always easy. It requires trust, transparency, and willingness to let go of control. It's really essential for relevance and scale that we can work together. My third point is about sustainability and impact. Sustainability is one of the biggest challenges across all regions. The current geopolitical context means fewer resources, and this affects all of us. But sustainability is not only about funding. It's also about how we sustain collective impact. When everyone has a seat at the table, it becomes easier to share both the opportunities and the challenges. And to me, there are three elements that matter. One, being responsive to users' needs. The second, delivering timely and quality evidence. And the third, building capacity or sharing capacity within different regions, not just delivering the outputs. In Cochrane's case, we have been moving towards investing on regional evidence synthesis units so that we create a critical mass that really can work together across partnerships in the global north and the global south. And we are increasingly look at ways to responsibly use AI and the AI-enabled approach to make the evidence that we need more timely and more accessible. But ultimately, impact happens when evidence is embedded in systems, not when it's simply published, and we know that. So my final reflection is, and I often think about the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We are all under pressure to deliver more with fewer resources and faster. All of these matters, but if we want to create a truly living evidence ecosystem, we need to think carefully about how we collaborate across regions and build shared platforms that can be used by everyone everywhere. Ultimately, the question is not whether we can build a living evidence ecosystem, but whether we're willing to work differently to make it happen. Because the future depends not only on data, but on sustained collaboration and shared responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. That was very inspiring, sitting here smiling. Thanks for your reflections from lessons learned from Cochrane, a very extensive network. You know, one of the things that came at me would have been the need for decentralized or distributed ecosystems, local leadership and from local actors, a need to move from traditional governance to shared ownership and leadership, or what we call network governance, and sustain collective impact. Again, I saw that in John's presentation as well as yours, to ensure that we're responsive, that we're timely, and that we're building capacity. So thanks for those lessons learned. All right, so I'm going to really hand over to Rona now. So Rona, we're looking forward to your contribution.
Thank you so much, Shelly-Ann, and thank you to HubLac and everyone for this invitation to come and be part of a very exciting milestone for you, but also the conversation today for me echoes so many things that you know bring back again reflections from many other conversations. So I'm glad that you know it's all aligned with everything that's happening. I obviously bring greetings from the Africa Evidence Network. I hope you know several of our members are part of this, because I think what you're discussing here is pertinent to us as well. And so even what I will be sort of highlighting today is from you know, conversations and lessons that we've learned or continuously learn. Because again, you know, this landscape just keeps changing, the trends keep changing, and you've got to keep unlearning and learning and, you know, reflecting and renewing what you think you understand. So what I think is that globally, evidence-informed policy is moving in a few clearer directions. So for many years, there are many things we've kind of been, you know, trying to understand. But I think many things in current trends are giving us clearer directions. First, there's a shift from seeing evidence use as a one-off, you know, technical product toward, you know, treating it as an ecosystem issue. And I think, you know, this sort of message comes out in a few things that Carla was highlighting, that we are now moving. The question is no longer only whether good evidence exists, but whether we have institutions, incentives, relationships, capacities, standards, norms, you know, that allow that evidence to flow into decision-making in a timely and credible way. So it used to be, do you have the evidence? Can you move it? You know, do you have the paper? Do you have whatever it is? But now it's more than that. The institutions, the incentives, the relationships build an ecosystem that allows for timeliness, for credibility, but also for sustainability. I also think there is growing recognition that governments need institutionalized evidence use. So not just the ad hoc evidence use as and when, you know, you deem that fit. And that, you know, comes with certain responsibilities. That means embedding evidence functions into routine policy processes through structures such as knowledge translation platforms, evidence units, evaluation systems, making brokerage roles, you know, formal, and making sure that your science advisory sort of systems are actually sound. So it's no longer, let me give a call to this one professor that I know. It's going to be institutionalized use, you know, within these institutions and governments. The other thing that I think, you know, that is a global trend and it's giving us clearer direction as
I stopped hearing Rona.
Yes, she's accidentally muted herself.
Sorry. Again, this is really sensitive, so I'll keep my fingers away. But basically, I think that the other thing in terms of trends is that the field is responding to pressure for evidence being faster, more contextualized, usable, under real-world constraints. So policymakers are dealing with, all sorts of things: overlapping crises, fiscal pressure, political contestation, compressed timelines. So the demand is increasingly for evidence that is timely, is policy relevant, it's locally grounded. They just don't have the time to go and do this for you, So us as brokers, us as people who moving the evidence around, these are things that we need to stay, focused on. The other thing, I'm glad Carla highlighted it as well. There's no conversation now that is complete without us highlighting AI, is there? So digital transformation and AI are trends that have emerged but are continuously emerging. So these tools can improve, the work that we do. They can improve how we do our work, the horizon scope scanning, access to knowledge, the evidence synthesis, but they also raise concerns about quality. So while we're excited and we want to maximize the potential of AI and other technologies, we're also very cautious about maintaining integrity and reliability as part of the future agenda, for evidence-informed policy making. And fifth, maybe the last that I want to highlight, again, very, very similar, is the stronger attention from ourselves, but also from, the people we work with or that we sort of supply with what we do. There's a stronger attention to inclusion, to equity, and this is not just about inclusion and equity of people or people categories, but also equity in terms of evidence, in terms of the types of evidence we're including when we're advising them. So plural forms of evidence. So across regions, evidence-informed policy is increasingly expected to include not only academic research, but also implementation data, citizen, experience, practitioner knowledge, context-specific insights. All of this is expected to be in there. So in this sort of changing landscape, collaborative networks play a very huge and strategic role, because when you think about it, no single actor can actually make an evidence ecosystem work alone. Universities can produce and governments can make the policy, intermediaries need to broker, the civil society brings in accountability, funders shape the incentives. So networks are so important to help to connect these actors so that evidence does not, remain fragmented. Their role is strategic in several ways, but I'll highlight the fact that they create relationships of trust. And trust is often what determines whether evidence is really ignored, contested, or used. Anybody who's been in my class, that's the first thing I say, that, you could have the best evidence, but evidence is purveyed on relationships and not necessarily on its merit. I also see them as enablers of peer learning, especially across continents, across regions, across countries, across, all kinds of divides, so that institutions do not have to reinvent everything from scratch. And I think HABLAC and the Africa Evidence Network are a huge testimony of this. There's so much that we're sharing and learning from each other that we don't have to go through the mistakes and the barriers and hurdles that were there before. But they also build a shared language in terms of norms and standards. And this is very important for quality. If we didn't have a place where we come together and have a shared understanding of things or shared language or shared standards, then quality, transparency, and relevance, become very, very, you can't ensure that these are happening, very well. And my last point, I think that, and this is very important for us in the Global South, that these networks actually can amplify voices. We absolutely need this when you consider this in the Global South. Individual voices coming out just they're noise. They become noise. They're fragmented. We are just unable to have a common, message coming out. And these networks are able to amplify those voices, and they support more balanced, regionally grounded leadership in global evidence conversations. So really, from the perspective of our network, the Africa Evidence Network, we really think that collaborative networks are no longer just spaces where you convene people, bring them together. They're actually part of the infrastructure of evidence-informed policy. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Rona. We're really happy to learn from your extensive wealth of knowledge. Some things that you brought to life there would be seeing the wider picture or the bigger picture. So moving from evidence use or evidence generation, really focusing more on the ecosystem and institutionalization. And of the common themes we got this morning would have been timeliness and real-time responses, supported by the safe and responsible use of AI. Of course, always context, local context, equity and inclusion, the collective impact approach, and again, network governance. We have one question, so I'm going to put you guys on the spot for a little bit. So we do have one question we want Rona and Carlo, giving them maybe about a minute and a half to answer. So can you guys give us maybe just one example of how to foster trust in context of power imbalances and how to make sure everyone is aligned with we shared principles? So how do we foster trust in the context of shared power, in the context of power imbalances, and to ensure that we are all aligned with respect to shared principles? So Carla, do you want to go first?
It's a really good question. The first thing I want to say is that it's not easy. And I think, I take something from my grandmother. She had 2 years of education, and she basically helped raise 6 children and helped raise 8 of her grandchildren just because she believed on values. And she had many challenges on her life, including children with mental health, etc. But she always told something that for me was a start to follow. That when you go to sleep, you have to go to sleep and lie down and believe that you've done the best you can. And I do think that this is about people. Trust is not built in institutions. The last year with the EZIC, for example, I've met such an amount of amazing people that I had not had the opportunity. Some of them are here, had not had the opportunity before. And we had many challenges. We had to really overcome a lot of challenges. We knew that we were all with the same values. We didn't think the same way. We didn't think that the results and the response of what we were building were the same, but we had similar values, and we were guided and led by values. And some of people are from global north, others from global south. It doesn't really matter. It's about people, and it's about how, what is your outcome? What do you want to achieve? For me, as someone that grew up in a small village in Brazil, this is such a great opportunity to say it doesn't really matter where you grew up and what were your things. We all have something to contribute, and none of us can do it alone, especially on the days of today on which we face significant challenges. So keep your values, keep our values, and let's join force, because it's not going to be simple and it's not going to be easy. I'm sorry if I don't know if I answer your question, but that is really from my heart.
You most certainly did, and that's really a core principle of the LAC Hub, knowing that we all bring our local personal experiences, giving each other the platform to share and to incorporate those, and to just really have that value system and that trust and risk. So Rona, what about you? Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, very, very quickly, just pulling on again, a few of the experiences, just being in spaces. And the experiences can be, I think, as an intermediary, this is a question that can really pull on the experiences, because you find yourself in spaces where you're the underdog. You also find yourself in spaces where you're the one with the power, and so a lot of reflection if you are going to be a valuable person. And so pulling on that, I'll say I think the very, very first thing is to actually acknowledge the imbalances. Sometimes you're unable to act on something only because you didn't even realize it's there, or if you do realize it's there and are not able to acknowledge it, then you don't even push yourself to openly work on it. So I think the first thing in spaces where we are, when you look at your ecosystem, how do you fit into it? Are you the privileged one? Are things, sort of changing often? Are you the person on the other side? And therefore, what is your, sort of role? So acknowledging imbalances and acknowledging them openly, having those open conversations, about the fact that this is how we feel as the partner. We do feel that we're in a space where we might have an upper hand, and therefore, we do not want to let those feelings sort of move around as we do this work. I think that's the very, very first important space. The other thing is to agree, and acknowledge again that everyone brings value. So again, you end up in spaces where you feel that you're the one bringing, and therefore, if I'm not here, I really lose nothing. Okay. And I think for many of us in privileged positions, very often you do feel like you're the one bringing. But if you do not have, I think for me, it's a value. Carla has talked about values, and I won't belabor that point because I think you actually do need those shared, sort of values. But they're also values that should shape a person who wants to be in a relationship, and make it a beneficial one. But I think agreeing that everyone brings value, is a very, very good starting point, because if you're in a privileged position, it pushes you to check, what is it that I can get from my partner? If you are on the other side, and it's never black or white, and sometimes it's also, moving pieces. But if you are on the other side, it also pushes you to have some sort of responsibility in terms of, yes, I'm receiving, but what else can I bring to the table? What else can I bring to this relationship? How can I make myself valuable so that I'm not, only seen as a receiver? I certainly must be valuable to be here. The other thing, after you agree that everybody is of value, I think then is to clarify those roles, what are we doing? Who is doing what? And how do we relate? How do we report to each other? How do we, sort of have, say, shared expectations, having that conversation where everybody understands, what it is that is expected of them, I think breaks down those barriers of where, somebody is the one kind of giving the instruction on what needs to be done and somebody else is receiving. So I think you're able to break that down. And I think the last thing is to, or maybe second to last, is to intentionally make spaces where everybody feels comfortable to have a conversation, to even air grievances if they have to, but breaking down that feeling of somebody's in control. And sometimes it's just small things like, where are meetings held? At what time are they held? Things like that. So being very intentional about making space for everybody who's in this sort of ecosystem. And the last thing is really accountability, restraint and accountability. There will be many things where you do feel things should have been done a certain way, but maybe because of culture, because of, logistics, resources, things might not go your way. Are you able to have restraint and allow people to sort of, to be, and this is not condoning like lazy behavior or all sorts of things, but really having restraint and understanding, for other people, and also having a spirit of accountability. Everybody should be accountable to somebody, within, so there's no sort of hierarchy in terms of we report upwards, and therefore there's somebody at the top who doesn't get to calm down. But having that way where everybody can be accountable to others. I think these are the things that quickly come off in terms of trying to foster trust and break down those power imbalances.
Thanks so much, Rona. And I have to say that was so very, very, very insightful. You know, one of the things you said is that internal assessment and being aware of what we call unconscious biases and positioning. So it's so important. So Rona, that was helpful, and not just for networks, but even in our personal lives and in our personal relationships, you know, doing that internal assessment. Say thank you to all our panelists for these rich discussion and reflections. With this in mind now, I turn over this part of the program to our Hub LAC team, and they will present the findings from the regional mapping exercise. So thanks again to our distinguished panelists for sharing with us your global, regional, and applied perspectives. Handing over now.
Muchas gracias, Shelly. Muchas gracias, Carla, Rona. Ahora vamos a pasar para la presentación del mapeo y continuamos con nuestro equipo de Javilaxi.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, no sé dónde están. Hola a todos, es una alegría enorme estar aquí con ustedes hoy para compartir un poco de los resultados de este trabajo que construimos a tantas manos. Yo me llamo Ingrid, yo hago parte del equipo de Hub como coordinadora y estoy aquí hoy para hablar un poco más de los antecedentes, el objetivo, la metodología y también iniciar un poco la presentación de algunos de los resultados. Bueno, como ya dijo Daniel, el Hub él nació con el objetivo de fortalecer el ecosistema regional para la formulación de políticas informadas por evidencias en nuestra región. Y en esta misma línea, este informe que lanzamos hoy busca mapear y analizar a los actores que dan forma al uso de evidencia en una formulación de políticas en América Latina y el Caribe, generando conocimientos que fortalezcan las alianzas del Hub y orienten también las prioridades y conecten el ecosistema regional. Antes de pasar a los datos y los gráficos, quería comentar algunas cosas importantes sobre nuestra metodología. Bueno, primero, los números de los datos que vamos a presentar aquí hoy no reflejan a toda América Latina y Caribe, y esa tampoco era nuestra intención. Lo que buscamos fue mostrar un primer retrato de este ecosistema que es tan importante para nosotros. Y queremos que este sea un punto de partida para empezar a analizar estos datos juntos y pensar en algunas preguntas como cuál es el futuro que queremos construir, cuáles son los espacios que nosotros como América Latina y Caribe deseamos y necesitamos ocupar en el campo de las políticas informadas por evidencia. Y justamente para ir fomentando este debate, no guardamos estos datos solo para el evento de hoy. Durante el segundo semestre de 2025 estuvimos presentando estos resultados como preliminares en eventos clave. Llevamos estas discusiones al Evidence 2025 en Benín y a un evento regional en la Semana de la Evidencia, y también hicimos una presentación en la bueno, todo esto con este objetivo de compartir este retrato, escuchar y expandir nuestra red. Bueno, no voy a dar muchos detalles de esta sesión para que también podamos enfocar directamente en los resultados. Si desean, pueden leer con más atención y más calma en el informe. Pero sí quiero destacar, puedes volver, Jessica, por favor, solo para destacar que utilizamos la forma como recolectamos los datos. Utilizamos un enfoque mixto, entonces primero lanzamos un formulario en línea en español, portugués e inglés y después hicimos entrevistas cualitativas para entender mejor cómo esos detalles de los datos que los números por sí solo no nos cuentan. Bueno, entonces puede pasar, Jessie. Entonces, pasando a los datos, hoy nuestra base cuenta con 125 respuestas de 15 países. Y el análisis que les voy a mostrar ahora se basa en los 123 participantes que autorizaron el uso de su información. Como pueden ver en la pantalla, tenemos una grande concentración en América del Sur, casi que 83 de las organizaciones y personas mapeadas están en esta región. Y si sumamos Brasil y Colombia, por ejemplo, ellos representan cerca de mitad de las respuestas. Por un lado, esto tiene sentido al nivel demográfico porque 65% de la población de nuestra región vive en América del Sur. Un otro punto, antes de hablar por otro lado, un otro punto que pueden observar es que hay redes en muchos otros países, pero estos tienen una participación mucho más tímida, como de uno o dos participantes. Y un otro punto interesante es que este gráfico nos apunta para la necesidad de ampliar entonces esta red en América Central y el Caribe también. Solo para que entendamos mejor estos números, esta zona de América Central y Caribe representa como 34% de la población total en nuestra región, pero en este mapeamiento nos muestra que alcanzó cerca de 10%. Puede volver, Jessie, por favor. Y esto se conecta directamente con el gráfico de idiomas. Aunque el español e inglés tiene buena presencia, 1/3 de los participantes dice hablar solo un idioma. Esto nos demuestra que la barrera del idioma es un riesgo real en nuestra región y que puede dificultar el intercambio de iniciativas. Y también miramos y aprendemos con la experiencia de la African Evidence Network y entendemos que superar este muro no va a pasar de forma natural, que va a requerir una planificación, una inversión institucional de nuestro ecosistema, ¿sí? Y siguiendo con este tema de los idiomas, es importante decir que no somos una red hoy que trabaja con 3 idiomas oficiales. Por lo tanto, no tuvimos una versión de este formulario en francés o en holandés. Como hay países en nuestra región con estos idiomas oficiales, esto puede también significar una barrera para que ellos pudieran participar o ingresarse en estas dinámicas regionales. Entonces, superar esta barrera geográfica y de idiomas es algo que a nosotros nos gustaría enfocar en las próximas ediciones, y no solo para mejorar el mapeo, sino para cumplir con este gran objetivo de Hub, que es integrar verdaderamente a nuestra región y promover el intercambio entre nosotros. Bueno, sobre los temas, en qué temas estamos trabajando. El gráfico muestra que la salud sigue siendo nuestro tema principal. Está presente en casi 66 de las respuestas, pero la buena noticia es que estamos viendo como un ecosistema más madura y que se diversifica un poco más. Vemos mucha fuerza en áreas como educación, innovación en la gestión pública, medio ambiente y derechos humanos también. Y no solo eso, también aparecen temas como cultura, género y deporte con una presencia importante, lo que refuerza aún más esta diversidad. La siguiente, Jessie. Ahora, si miramos qué tipo de organizaciones tenemos, vemos un predominio del sector académico con 57 organizaciones. Les siguen el sector público y las organizaciones no gubernamentales. ¿Y quién son las personas detrás de estas instituciones? La mayoría trabaja con gestión y proyectos, de proyectos, seguida de especialistas y consultores. Y por supuesto, tiene sentido, de hecho, que sean las universidades, los centros de investigación y el sector público que están aquí, ya que son los actores que ya están más sintonizados con la importancia de usar evidencia para tomar decisiones. Pero esto también nos da una tarea de comprender quién son estos actores a nivel local. Estas están en las gran metrópolis, son gestores territoriales, en fin, para que no perdamos de vista a quién debe también llegar esta evidencia de manera más directa en la práctica. La siguiente, por favor. Ahora miramos sobre la función en el ecosistema y para mirar un poco más de estas organizaciones destaco este gráfico que es bastante revelador porque cuando preguntamos por el rol que desempeñan en el ecosistema y aquí podían elegir más de una opción. 104 organizaciones se identifican como productoras de evidencia, 79 como intermediarias y solo 38 como usuarias directas. Y esto también refleja en el alcance geográfico. La mayoría, casi que mitad, trabaja, creo que esto está en un otro gráfico, Jessie, lo siguiente. Casi que mitad trabaja al nivel nacional con un enfoque de influir en las políticas públicas en sus propios países. Y como viene también en este otro gráfico, cuando los preguntamos a cuánto tiempo operan, 74 de estas instituciones y pues, personas que nos respondieron dijeron que están trabajando en esta institución, existe a más de 6 años. Y esto nos muestra también un poco de la maturidad de nuestras instituciones. Creo que estos son algunos de los datos que nos gustaría empezar hablando, pero también después creo que Raquel también va a hablar un poco más sobre cómo utilizamos esta evidencia en la práctica. Entonces, por favor, Raquel.
Vale, gracias, buenos días. Bien, soy Raquel Cerqueira de la comunicación del HubLac y luego también estoy feliz por estar compartiendo y diseminando estos resultados de nuestro report. Y quisiera comentarles brevemente sobre la parte de la investigación que se enfocó en entender cómo se utiliza la evidencia en la práctica. Es decir, analizamos qué tipos de actividades se realizan, quiénes producen, quiénes demandan la evidencia, cuáles son las principales fuentes de información y también cómo están organizadas las redes de colaboración. Y el primer punto sobre servicios y actividades. En la respuesta identificamos una gama amplia de categorías de servicios y productos dentro del ecosistema de la evidencia, pero para facilitar el análisis nos organizamos en 3 ejes centrales. Entonces, primero la generación y análisis de evidencia, que concentra más de la mitad, 52%, y aquí encontramos productos más tradicionales como síntesis, mapas de evidencia, revisiones sistemáticas, análisis y modelaje de datos, encuestas e incluso estudios experimentales. Y ahí, en segundo lugar, la evaluación y aplicación. Puedes volver, Jessica. Gracias. La evaluación y aplicación con cerca de 28%, con actividad. Jessica. Gracias. Entonces, en segundo lugar, la evaluación y aplicación, que incluye actividades más orientadas a la toma de decisiones, ¿no? La evaluación de impacto y monitoreo, desarrollo de guías, consultas de expertos, incluso métodos más estructurados como el Delphi. Y por último, la comunicación y movilización, que representa el 20,5%, y ahí como productos claves para acercar la evidencia a los tomadores de decisión y a la sociedad, como diálogos de política, paneles ciudadanos, narrativas para la promoción de la evidencia y otros productos de comunicación científica. Y estos datos también confirman que muchas organizaciones cumplen funciones múltiples. Entonces, es una característica del ecosistema como modelos más híbridos, ¿no? Donde se vuelven menos claras las fronteras entre producción y traducción de evidencias en estas organizaciones. Puede pasar, Jessica. Y en relación a las fuentes de información, vimos que predominan las fuentes científicas y estadísticas, también seguida por materiales documentales y legales. Y un punto es que también aparecen otras fuentes como materiales digitales, testimoniales e incluso saberes tradicionales. Y es un punto relevante, es que aunque el mapeo mostró que las fuentes formales y centrales también son centrales para la región. También se observó un uso relevante de testimonios y saberes tradicionales y populares. Entonces, esto es importante para nuestra región, donde tenemos una diversidad social, cultural y territorial, y exige estas miradas más contextualizadas. Entonces, se permite utilizar también estos tipos de evidencia más locales para construir evidencias más conectadas con las realidades y los contextos locales. Entonces, fue un punto interesante de la investigación. Puede pasar. Gracias. Entonces, acerca de los públicos, los principales destinatarios son la gestión pública con 71%, seguidos por investigadores y la sociedad civil, pero también aparecen actores del poder ejecutivo, legislativo y judicial, y además del sector privado y los medios. Y estos datos también sugieren que es una fuerte concentración en la gestión pública, que es un ecosistema altamente orientado a apoyar la toma de decisiones en la política pública y muchas veces en contextos que demandan respuestas más ágiles. Por eso tienden a priorizarse los formatos como síntesis de evidencias, respuestas rápidas, en lugar de investigaciones más profundas o de largo plazo. Entonces, es una relación un poco más madura en relación de evidencia al gobierno, pero también podría transformarse hacia prácticas más colaborativas y transversales, porque vimos que las organizaciones productoras son muchas y muy diversas en la región. Y por último, hablando acerca de las redes colaborativas, una parte significativa de los actores que contestó están vinculados a redes de evidencia, aunque también hay casos que esta información no estaba disponible. Pero las redes mencionadas incluyen tanto iniciativas regionales como globales con alto potencial para fortalecer el intercambio de aprendizajes en la región. Esto es clave porque ya vimos en el debate que las redes no solo conectan los actores, sino también que facilitan esta circulación de conocimiento, metodologías y buenas prácticas, además de abrir oportunidades de financiación y colaboración. Entonces, la próxima diapositiva tiene algunos ejemplos de las redes, Jessica. Entonces, algunas redes mencionadas por los contestantes fueron estas, pero creo que hay más. Incluso pueden comentar si si pertenecen a alguna otra red regional. Y aquí cierro mi participación, pero dejo abierto también para que comenten y traigan preguntas en el chat de Zoom o YouTube para que contestemos al fin de la sesión. Muchas gracias.
Hola, buenos días. Buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches, depende de dónde se encuentren. Yo soy David García, hago parte del equipo del Hub y voy a hablarles un poco de las barreras y facilitadores. Si quieres, Jessy, pasa la diapositiva. Un poco de las barreras y facilitadores que encontramos luego del proceso de las entrevistas. Digamos que esta sección o esta identificación de estas barreras y estos facilitadores lo pudimos ver o identificar luego de las 7 entrevistas que tuvimos con actores clave de la región y que habían pues obviamente también diligenciado el Forms. Entonces digamos que esto nos permite identificar o entender que la forma en la que se produce, se traduce y circula la evidencia también está muy mediada por diferentes relaciones que se encuentran entre las personas y en el ecosistema en América Latina. Entonces quisimos dividir los resultados en 3 niveles. Un nivel individual que centra su interés en la formación, en las experiencias de los trabajadores, de las personas que están alrededor de la evidencia en nuestra región. Un nivel organizacional que habla un poco de esas estructuras y recursos, alianzas y prácticas que hacen las instituciones como actor. Y por último, un nivel político y social que gira en torno a este contexto en el que se da la evidencia. Entonces, digamos que esos 3 fueron las divisiones. Yo voy a hablarles, si quieres, Jessy, pasa, porfa, de diapositiva. Ahí. ¿Me escuchan? Sí. Pueden pasar la diapositiva. Ah, bueno, ya, perdón, es que se me fue la señal. Entonces voy a hablarles un poco del nivel individual y luego Silvia les cuenta de los otros 2 niveles. Entonces, digamos que en este nivel lo que nos encontramos con las entrevistas es que esta capacidad de producir evidencia y este trabajo que se hace alrededor está muy mediado por las capacidades técnicas y especializadas de los individuos que están en todo el día alrededor, pues en torno al trabajo, y también como sus distintos niveles de aprendizaje y momentos en los que llegan a ser parte del ecosistema. Entonces encontramos como facilitadores las trayectorias que tienen algunas personas en el ecosistema. Eso permite ampliar mucho más los conocimientos, de llegar con distintos proyectos y distintas ideas para empezar a usar la evidencia. También nos hablaban mucho de esa experiencia previa en carteras públicas que permite un poco conocer el sector y saber cómo interactuar con estas evidencias y cómo implementarlas y llevarlas a cabo. Y ya del lado de las barreras, encontramos un poco esa incorporación tardía de perfiles especializados en este tema, que ha hecho que nos demoremos un poco, que avancemos un poco pues, en estos procesos de políticas informadas por la evidencia. Y lo otro que encontramos es que hay múltiples roles en los equipos que no cuentan o que no tienen las capacitaciones adecuadas para llevar a cabo algunos procesos. Por ejemplo, hay comunicadores que trabajan haciendo cosas que hacen investigadores estadísticos o viceversa, investigadores que les toca por una falta de personal eh, trabajar o hacer la parte de comunicación. Entonces encontramos, pues nos dijeron algunos entrevistados que estos podían ser algunas barreras. ¿Podemos pasar, Jessy, por favor? Y acá, entonces, lo que quisimos traer fue unas citas de algunas de las entrevistas que tuvimos que evidencian, pues, lo que les dije anteriormente. Entonces, podemos leer, pues, Por ejemplo, la capacidad técnica especializada es clave para transformar la capacidad individual en un impacto institucional efectivo, decía un entrevistado de Brasil. En el caso de las barreras, decía otro entrevistado, la necesidad de mayor formación en síntesis y mapas generó inconsistencias técnicas y demostró que la incorporación tardía de consultores puede comprometer la consistencia del trabajo. Entonces vemos, y para no alargarme mucho más y darle paso a Silvia, vemos pues que tenemos algunos aspectos claves a los que debemos mirar o tratar con atención, pero también encontramos muchas posibilidades y muchos asuntos positivos en este campo o en este nivel individual. Muchas gracias, Silvi.
Buenos días, ¿cómo está? Mi nombre es Silvia Villatoro, yo también hago parte del equipo del Hub y yo voy a hablarle de los siguientes dos niveles que nosotros encontramos sobre barreras y facilitadores. Primero con el nivel organizacional. Este es donde vemos cómo las instituciones pueden habilitar o limitar el uso de la evidencia o cómo en las organizaciones se puede habilitar o limitar el uso de la evidencia. Y tenemos varios elementos claves. Uno, primero, puede ser el financiamiento, que cuando existe un financiamiento estable, institucionalizado, alineado con las prioridades del gobierno, es más fácil que se generen las condiciones para sostener a los equipos, para desarrollar productos, mantener procesos durante el tiempo. Pero cuando el financiamiento es solamente puntual o de corto plazo, lo que aparece es una inestabilidad. Los equipos no se pueden sostener, procesos que se interrumpen, la dificultad constante para poder planear a largo plazo. Un segundo elemento también muy importante es las redes y las alianzas. Creo que ya la doctora Rona lo mencionó, que es muy importante y aquí también en las entrevistas surge eso, que las organizaciones no pueden operar de forma aislada. Cuando hay una articulación entre la academia, el sector público, la sociedad civil o incluso la cooperación internacional, se amplía la capacidad y se comparte conocimiento, se generan marcos comunes para un uso de una evidencia, ¿cierto? Esto también permite que esa evidencia no se quede en un solo espacio, sino que circule, tenga mayor alcance. Por otro lado, em, hay otro punto que tiene que ver con los procesos internos y aquí especialmente los procesos administrativos y burocráticos pueden tener gran relevancia. Encontramos que hay tensiones muy importantes entre los tiempos institucionales o los tiempos organizacionales que muchas veces no coinciden con los tiempos de la decisión política. Y esto significa que productos de evidencia que pueden demorar mucho tiempo en desarrollarse o aprobarse pueden llegar tarde o llegar a perder relevancia. Y a esto se suman otros factores, como sistemas de contratación con baja tolerancia al riesgo, lo que dificulta una adopción de nuevas metodologías o procesos editoriales también que pueden ser muy largos y que mantienen productos detenidos durante mucho tiempo. Finalmente, algo que también aparece como un facilitador es la existencia de estructuras específicas como observatorios o plataformas de datos, unidades técnicas, que permiten traducir la evidencia en formatos mucho más accesibles, facilitar su circulación hacia distintos públicos, incluyendo tomadores de decisiones, pero también medios o la sociedad civil, ¿cierto? Entonces, Jessy, ¿puedes poner la siguiente? Aquí en las citas nosotros podemos ver que estos testimonios ilustran muy bien estas dinámicas que mencioné. Por ejemplo, se menciona cómo el financiamiento municipal puede alinearse directamente con la evidencia y con las prioridades del gobierno, o sea, hacer que se alineen esta evidencia con las prioridades del gobierno. También aparece la idea de construir redes y ecosistemas de forma en que la información no se beneficie solo de ella las instituciones, sino también las comunidades. Pero al mismo tiempo se destaca que la búsqueda constante de financiamiento es una dificultad estructural y hay ejemplos muy concretos también de productos de evidencia que permanecen años sin ser divulgados debido a trámites administrativos, ¿cierto? Siguiente, por favor. Con respecto al nivel político o social, Finalmente este nivel es el nivel más alto, ¿cierto? Es donde nosotros evidenciamos que existe un contexto muy amplio que es determinante para el uso de la evidencia. Aquí el uso de la evidencia depende de factores como la estabilidad política, la apertura de los gobiernos, marcos legales, la cultura de la valoración del conocimiento también. Y entre los facilitadores encontramos marcos legales que garantizan el acceso a la información, que crean condiciones estructurales para el uso de la evidencia. También aparece un aprendizaje transnacional, donde los países no tienen que empezar desde cero, sino que pueden adaptar experiencias exitosas de otros contextos. Y hay algo también muy importante que es la articulación entre los actores. Sociedad civil, academia, cooperación internacional pueden generar políticas más sostenibles en el tiempo. Además, se destacan también esas ventanas de oportunidad, como lo decía el doctor John Lavis, que son momentos específicos donde la evidencia logra incidir de manera muy clara en la toma de decisiones. Entonces, son espacios para aprovecharse, ¿cierto? Sin embargo, también se mencionan algunas barreras muy fuertes. Una de ellas es la polarización política, que puede hacer que la evidencia científica sea rechazada o percibida como una imposición externa, incluso como una amenaza. Otra es la rotación de autoridades, el cambio constante de las autoridades o de los gobiernos, y esto interrumpe procesos de largo plazo y afecta una sostenibilidad también de ciertas iniciativas. También aparecen problemas estructurales como vacíos normativos, burocracia excesiva, debilidad de los sistemas de información, que en algunos entrevistados describen como apagones de datos. Finalmente, en contextos de alta tensión política, ahí pueden surgir temores a represalias legales o políticas que de alguna forma pues, desincentivan, perdón, la colaboración técnica, incluso por parte de actores académicos, ¿cierto? Entonces, si quieres, vamos a la siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Aquí vemos. Gracias. Aquí vemos algunas citas que nos reflejan esto, son muy elocuentes. Por un lado, muestran cómo el aprendizaje entre países ha permitido mejorar políticas de manera progresiva. Por otro lado, también se evidencian contextos donde la evidencia puede ser rechazada por razones ideológicas o incluso actores técnicos prefieren no involucrarse por temor a consecuencias personales o institucionales. Y bueno, para cerrar, estos resultados nos dejan una idea central, y es que el uso de la evidencia no depende únicamente de producir información de buena calidad, sino depende de un ecosistema donde las capacidades individuales, las condiciones organizacionales y el contexto político, social, cultural se alineen, y cuando esa alineación ocurre, la evidencia puede no incidir de manera puede incidir de manera efectiva en la toma de decisiones, pero cuando no ocurre, incluso la mejor evidencia puede quedar sin un uso práctico. Gracias, doy paso entonces a mi compañera Ingrid.
Gracias. Bueno, solo para ir cerrando, vuelvo aquí para compartirles algunas reflexiones que nos deja a todo este proceso. Primero, como pudieron mirar, este trabajo no lo hicimos solos. A lo largo de estos meses fuimos madurando los datos y tuvimos la suerte de recibir comentarios muy valiosos de lo que llamamos amigos del Hub, como Leopoldo Fonte y Verónica Osorio, quienes nos ayudaron a darle mucha más profundidad a los datos que están viendo hoy. Sí, hay un gran mensaje que nos deja este mapeo, es el compromiso de hacer crecer y diversificar nuestro ecosistema. De hecho, una de las entrevistas nos dijeron algo que era algo como: mientras más diverso y multilateral sea el ambiente de colaboración, más útil será. Y ese es exactamente el camino que queremos seguir. Porque en la práctica eso significa, por ejemplo, que para integrar activamente a nuestros colegas de Caribe necesitamos considerar este multilingüismo con una prioridad para nuestra región. Entonces, Por eso no queremos que este mapeo sea simplemente un reporte en PDF que descargan hoy y que queda guardado. Nuestro real deseo es que sea consolidado como una base más dinámica, viva, y que todavía estamos aún definiendo los pasos técnicos de cómo vamos a implementar en el día a día esta idea, pero la meta principal es esa, facilitar el diálogo, el aprendizaje mutuo entre las personas que están en nuestra red. Entonces queremos tener este espacio que sea fácil de saber quién es quién, y dónde se conectar y colaborar y que sea algo natural. Entonces, cierro recordando un hecho muy importante que dijo al inicio, que es este mapeo no es solo, es solo nuestro punto de partida porque no es solamente un punto de partida porque no es un destino final. Entonces, la base es que nos va a servir para tener un diagnóstico y pensar en una acción para que podamos construir esto juntos de forma más cohesionada. Entonces, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos hoy y por ser parte de este futuro que estamos armando juntos.
Muchas gracias, el equipo, aquí, todas las personas que están junto de nosotros. Por la primera vez estuvimos todos juntos hablando de los resultados. Estoy muy emocionada de estarmos consiguiendo hablar todos juntos y de su parte, de lo que hacen en Hublac. Y a mí me gustaría dejar 5 minutitos, entre 5 minutos de intervalo para terminar un descanso y volvemos. Por favor, no salgan, solo salir y volver. Gracias.
Sí, gracias y por favor dejen sus comentarios y preguntas en el chat aquí en Zoom y también en el YouTube porque breve tendremos un debate sobre los resultados de mapeo. Gracias. Hola, hola, empezamos a volver. Si están en la cocina, vengan.
Entonces, vamos a empezar el momento porque necesitamos cerrar en el horario para garantizar que todos ustedes estén con la traducción también lista. Entonces, vamos volviendo. Y ahora vamos a escuchar un poco algunos comentarios que ustedes pueden poner acá en chat, algunas dudas, un poco si estos datos están reflexionando ah, la realidad de ustedes o si hay algo que no esté claro en nuestra presentación que gustarían de hacer un comentario. Antes de esto, voy a pasar la palabra a Ingrid, no sé si ya está. Ingrid o Laura, sí, porque a nosotros gustaría de escuchar también un poco de Rona, de cómo pasó a Rona estos datos y un poco para motivar nuestra plenaria a hablar un poco, comentarios. ¿Sí? Ingrid.
Sure, thank you, Jessica. And again, a huge congratulations, on an absolutely fantastic but really necessary effort. And also to the presenters, they really presented this, very well. It's a report that has a lot of information, but to be able to help us, digest it very quickly and very easily, thank you so much for that. I have read the report. I have listened to it as well. And my view is that it really does reflect, again, I'm coming from the Africa Evidence Network, sort of perspective, and also benefiting from many, settings that form the network. I really think that it reflects the African reality to a considerable extent, maybe not completely, and I might pick one or two things, but to a large extent, it reflects the African and the Africa Evidence Network ecosystem very well. First, the whole ecosystem logic is very familiar. See, in Africa as well, evidence use is not simply about producing studies. It depends on relationships, and I think we highlighted that earlier. It depends on relationships, institutions, intermediaries, timing, and political context. And a lot of this, is coming through from the report. So very similar when you begin to think logically about these things in a way that is ecosystem sort of centric. Second, I think that the dominance, of academia and producers is very familiar. I think a lot of the motivation for the evidence work and everything that happens within evidence really does start, from academics. It does start from the people producing evidence, and many African evidence ecosystems are still more populated by producers and intermediaries than by, say, embedded, decision makers. This is beginning to change quite a bit. Although it has been a process, it has been a while, before we have seen the real action. For a long time, I think those users of evidence felt like they were recipients. Everything that is to shape the evidence and all of that was left to the academics and to producers. But that is beginning to change. But that dominance, we really can relate to it. And also, I think the report highlights the lack of certain specialties or the realization of which effective specialties should be availed in teams and also as part of the ecosystem. And again, I think it's a process of learning who actually needs to be part of this. So starting with the technical people, who else, needs to shape this? Communicators, people who help us to understand the realities, in communities, they should be part of this as well. The other thing, obviously, the barriers, we can relate to almost many of those barriers, to almost all of those barriers. So the barriers around language, regional unevenness, and uneven network reach, they strongly resonate with us. The Africa Evidence Network has had to navigate, Anglophone, Francophone. Many times we forget our Lusophone, colleagues, and then the representation from Northern Africa has been really poor, and it keeps us awake. How do we make this better? But it's just the realities of knowing that representation is never automatic. So just because you called out all the Africans, come here, and when you have those conversations, because we've reached out to our colleagues in Northern Africa, and you are amazed at what the reasons might be. So it might not be that they don't know about the network, but how you're actually running it. We were talking about making space for everybody, earlier. How do you break down those barriers to make that representation? So we can relate to a lot of that. The report's findings also that evidence works best when tied to collective spaces, and interinstitutional coordination is very consistent with us. And also the importance, of course, of political context, turnover, windows of opportunity, bureaucratic friction. This is very recognizable. But I think for me, the biggest thing is, and I think we've had this conversation again, with colleagues from the HABLAC region, the Latin American and Caribbean, is the tension, between short-term projects and the need for institutional continuity. Very, very identical to many of the African evidence initiatives. A lot of the work that we do is supported through, or it starts, with short-term projects and testing out, certain concepts. But over the last decade, many of our institutions, I remember having the very first conversation about this about 2014. So, it's a whole decade ago that many of our institutions have been really keen to transition to models that are less dependent on short-term projects. And so there's a lot that's coming out of this, it also, yeah, I think it just comes down to that, being able to sort of balance, that continuity, but also the opportunities that come with the short-term projects. Where it might reflect maybe less fully, and this is about maybe less fully rather than completely different. So the African ecosystem often has even sharper issues around donor dependence, uneven state capability, and the fragility of institutionalization across countries. So in many African settings, there's also a stronger need to account for regional blocks. So you hear us talking about the regional economic communities, like we have to account or think about the context of, say, the ECOWAS. This is the economic community in the West African, countries, or think about the East African community, or SADC, that's the Southern African Development Community. And so a lot of what we do has or calls for a stronger need to account for those regional blocks and continental bodies, humanitarian actors, international NGOs. So you find that our work is not complete without accountability for these as part of the evidence ecosystem. If anything, many of them actually are part of either producers or channels through which you can actually get evidence to many places. And in addition, of course, the role of informal politics, legitimacy and sovereignty concerns, this can even be more pronounced in some African contexts. So the parallels are strong, but the African ecosystem is in many places even more, heterogeneous and structurally uneven. But otherwise, I think that a lot of what is in this report, we can relate to. The mapping reflects African ecosystem reality quite substantially, and therefore there will be lots of lessons for us, especially at the level of structure and dynamics. And then we'll bring in a lot of our diversity and external dependency, to sort of shape things. But certainly, this is a report that we can relate to and can learn from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rona. This was lovely. And I think many colleagues, when we started the Latin America and the Caribbean Evidence Hub, were super inspired by the Africa Evidence Network. And right now, we are also very mindful of this process that we are celebrating this year 5 years of the Latin America and the Caribbean Evidence Hub. You celebrated your decade of the Africa Evidence Network. And how do we renew leaderships, and your beautiful, beautiful work with the Africa Evidence Youth League is something that we are looking closely. So really, really nice. Thank you again for your participation. We asked for some comments and questions here in the chat, and I see one question that I'm very happy to start to answer. And if anyone has from the team any opinions, I think it would be lovely. It's from our colleague Ana Barangan, and she asked us if to install a local evidence ecosystem, we recommend mapping capacities locally and then moving to map capacities in the region, right? And how they can intersect. So one thing that I need to share about this is that we've been, of course, in this mapping, trying to take a picture of our region, but we also follow very closely national level and even sometimes state and city level efforts that are happening here. So we have the Brazilian Coalition for Evidence, we have the Colombian Network for Evidence that was just created. We have beautiful work ongoing in Chile and Peru. We also now have Bolivia super active. We have, as you heard from Shelley, in the Caribbean, not only Trinidad and Tobago, but also countries in Barbados, in Jamaica, trying to develop these capacities. And from our experience, it's really, really important to know the local level, because even though we share problems and priorities as a region, of course, we have cultural identities, we have ways of working together that are really specific to each country. And even the capacities that we need to develop based on the story of funding regarding research for each country, for instance, can widely differ. And during the pandemic, we saw this. So if we are able indeed to map a local evidence ecosystem, and there is lovely tools to do that. The Brazilian Coalition for Evidence just launched its own mapping last year of our only the ecosystem for evidence use in health policies, and it was like enormous, let alone if we expand this to other social sectors. I think this give us the capacity to act culturally and really contextualized in really contextualized manners to improve this. But then reflecting these local capacities and stakeholders with the regional level allow us for this exchange and this identification of commonalities, even to demand for more funding or more resources for a region. Is really important to say collectively, this would be what benefits us most. In Brazil, maybe this is a different reality. In Colombia, we need more of this, but collectively as a region, this is where we want to advance. And I think one key issue that has appeared in many of our local mappings and then in the regional mapping as well is the issue of coordination. So having partners that help to establish together and co-create how the ecosystem will intersect, how colleagues will not duplicate efforts, how will you make the best use of resource. When big crises arise, how we'll act as a very well-oiled machine to deliver opportune answers. This is so key and really put into proof every time we have a new big challenge, right? And right now, there's a lot of talk about political instabilities, and in our region, every time we have elections, it seems that we are suffering a little bit of an earthquake. But as Carla, Rona, Shelley, and our mapping all suggest maintaining this recognition and these relationships throughout time is really important to survive turmoil. So, Anna, I think from your question about establishing a local evidence ecosystem, it's really key to know where you're based, the values, the differences. In a country as Brazil, we have at least 5 regions, each region with a very specific identity. And in many countries in our region and in Africa, you have diverse ways of being and approaching evidence. But the next step, of course, is once I get to know and I take a picture of my reality, how can I expand and understand what is common and where can we help each other. And we are very grateful for the Africa Evidence Network because from the get-go, you were our mentors to establish the Latin American and the Caribbean Evidence Hub. So we had to reach across the ocean, but hopefully this is a long-lasting relationship as well. I don't know if anyone else has any advice for Anna regarding how to install a local evidence ecosystem. And you will see also in our chat box that we have invites for anyone who wants to be part of the hub. We are very open, living network, always welcoming new members as well. Ingrid?
Thank you, Laura. I think Laura just answered beautifully, but just to add a comment, I would just say that, of course, mapping local capacities is like a fundamental foundation. And this is where like public policies are actually being implemented. But ideally, I would say it would be very important to like start mapping these capacities, but doing so while connecting to a regional perspective. So you don't like operate in a isolated way. We have an example in this report that is the case of I believe it started in Chile. So it's a Chile model that was about food labeling policy, and then it was adapted by Mexico, and Mexico basically wanted to do the same policy, and instead of starting from the ground, they basically took what Chile had done and improved that according to their perspectives. And right after, Argentina did the same. And the truth is, the way we do things in the Global South is different than the way we do things in the Global North. So I think that learning things from other countries from the region, it helps us also to make this process faster a little bit. So yeah, just like a few insights on this also.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. We also received a very interesting comment from Victor about transformative research assessment and integrating societal impacts into evaluation frameworks. And indeed, I agree, Victor, that we'll have more and more pressure to be very transparent about the impact of research in our evaluation of the trajectory, the career, the contribution that researchers are doing to society. And I think the beautiful connection that this environment of evidence-informed policy making allows is identifying priorities, trying to connect from the question formulation, researchers with policymakers, with their communities. So it's very much more a co-creation process and not necessarily only in the end when we have a very beautiful and shiny research, we present the results in a friendly manner. Of course, this has its value, but co-creating from the get-go, aligning research projects to policy priorities really helps. And then many of our colleagues who are researchers say, oh, but look, the metrics for me are publications in international journals. I have no incentive to publish locally. How can I do this? So indeed, as a community, I think we can advocate for, when looking to the career of researchers, having more proper incentives for this type of engagement, for this type of long-lasting relationships. At the same time, not being super passionate about my research, understanding, as John said in his video message as well, the importance of combining different types of knowledge. And our colleagues also in Africa Evidence Network are amazing in teaching us different forms of community engagement and integration of indigenous knowledge into the evidence-informed policymaking. So if you have never seen their work, I highly recommend you see the spotlights in their website. We pasted the website here beforehand. But yes, how can we go from being super personalist, which is a key element of relationship building, but to institutionalizing this as a way that we believe careers of researchers or careers of evidence intermediaries or careers of policymakers have the proper incentive to put this type of relationship and this type of just immediate connection that research is useful for decision making. It's not the only tool, it's not the most important one probably, but it's a very key aspect of decision making. It's a very much a collective work, and we have, as Victor says, a good way forward to promote awareness, to promote literacy around evidence use and engaging these communities. Thank you, Carol, for translating as well in Spanish and English, Victor's comment. So we are approaching the end. Rona, do you have any final message, anything you want to plug in from Africa Evidence Network, our amazing partners?
Yes, Laura. And these are reflections that I think I'm taking back to ourselves as well. I think that, after this really good mapping, where do you want to take it? After that, obviously, the first thing is to try and correct the gaps, the representational gaps. I know that happens as you grow. You find these people, you try and find them, and you're probably going to build, the multilingual infrastructure deliberately to reach out, to the other languages as well, the French-speaking colleagues and all. But I think one or two or three things that I'm also taking back to ourselves is that after mapping who is in the ecosystem, I think the next question you want to map, you want to move from actor mapping to flow mapping. How does evidence actually move within the ecosystem? How do resources move? How does influence move? What is the direction of relationships? I think that HubLac and ourselves, we should begin to think about mapping the key routes of influence. Who commissions evidence? Who translates it? Where does it store? What formats travel? what incentives shape uptake. And this is not in terms of we, the suppliers, trying to take evidence, but also within our own institutions. I think it's very, very important to understand the relationships, that helps us to understand which barriers that build relationships need to be broken, or that stand in the way of building relationships need to be broken, which ones need to be enhanced, which people are missing from the conversation, because you could also have people active, but you're underusing them. They should be in a certain, sort of conversation. I think the other thing which is related to that is now also focusing on promoting and building some of the missing intermediary capacities. See, the risk for many people is not the lack of science or the lack of technical knowledge, but the under-conversion of that, knowledge. So the report shows that evidence use depends heavily on translation, adaptation, on trust, on coordination, and therefore we should begin to invest in, yes, brokers, but conveners, communicators, evidence diplomats, and other institutional interfaces. I think they don't come very easily to us. We're always thinking about who's producing and who's using, and then that interface, which actually enables these two things, is left a little bit hanging. So we need to be thinking about it some more. The other thing is that networking is the starting point, but we have to be deliberate about institutionalization for our members. So networking matters, and then the longer term payoff comes from helping members to build durable structures. It's sad when we begin with certain members, and then you're taking a roll call several years after, and other members were not able to make it, or things fell apart. So being able to build durable structures, so it might be the structure, but also the systems in terms of standard methods, shared taxonomies, evidence units, observatories, things like that. How do we help each other? How do we help members think through, you have done well with this project and the work coming out of it, but what does your long-term survival look like, And also, in addition, thinking about the business model. I think what I've seen, for many of our members in the Africa Evidence Network, we're so focused on getting the work done, on doing such a perfect technical bit of it, but we are not, we are mostly academics, really. We are not built for thinking about business models of what we're doing. Many of us are in universities, so somebody's even thinking about whether we survive or not. And then things begin to break down. So in addition, I think we should be helping our members to think about the business model that brings continuity and also sustainability. And this is not only about finances, but also how our organizations and the general network, how it's actually set up. And my final one is, I think it's mentioned somewhere in the report about, the demand side. It's actually very, very strategic. I believe that demand side capability and capacity brings sustainability to our work. Once we have the side that uses what we produce or what we're working on, it's like a drive. Otherwise, if we remain on the supply side, we can produce as much as we want. But if nobody's actually finding it useful or taking it on, then, we at some point we'll find ourselves, they'll be like, oh, well, AI can help me. I don't really need. And then they don't know what value we are bringing. So building their capability and capacity to actually understand the value of a network, the value of the members of the network, the value of work that comes from the network is very, very important. But these are not only lessons for you. This is exactly what I'm taking back when we actually have a meeting tomorrow. This is what I'm taking back. This is what I've learned. This is what we want to work on, having learned from our colleagues. It's such a pleasure to be in this, not only in the webinar, but generally to be relating with HubLab.
Thank you so much. And you make my job so easy because one of my tasks wrapping this up is think about next steps. And you just gave us lovely suggestions. And as I mentioned again, part of the continuity is this fostering new leadership in different environments, not only in the research environment, but also the community level. The communicators, Raquel was very happy applauding because we know the value of engaging this network of communicators and also, of course, policymakers, decision makers at all levels. So Jessica, if you want to share again just the slide inviting everyone. We were so pleased to have you here in the Zoom or in YouTube. As I mentioned, our network is an open network. We want to co-create this future for evidence use in Latin America and the Caribbean, a sustainable one that really takes the best of each organization and gives back to all organizations and individual members. So if you have a desire to be part of HubLac or you want any support or information, you can access us on these links. And the mapping, as Rona very smartly said, is just one step, a picture that we take, but now how we make art of this is a collective task. So if you go home now, either for your lunch, your afternoon snack, maybe your breakfast because you joined too early, think about what role do you think you can make in this collective art making, and reach out to us, and we'll be so happy to collaborate. So thank you, everyone. It was lovely joining you this morning in Brazil, and we hope to see everyone soon enough. Thank you, gracias.